That night returns to me in fragments, as if my memory itself is afraid to face it whole. The air was heavy and unmoving, thick with the smell of damp earth and old wood, the kind of southern night where even insects seem to hold their breath. We had finished our labor late, our bodies aching in the familiar way that never truly healed, and the children were already asleep, curled beside their mothers on rough mats, dreaming dreams they were never allowed to speak aloud. I remember watching their chests rise and fall, thinking how fragile peace was, how it only existed when the masters were far away, and the dark pretended to protect us. Then the sound came. At first it was distant, boots striking dirt, voices carried on the wind, but fear has its own language, and my heart understood it before my mind did. Dogs began to bark, sharp and frantic, and lantern light flickered between the cabins like fireflies with evil intent. Someone whispered a prayer. Someone else sobbed softly, trying not to wake the children. But it was too late. The night had already chosen its purpose. The men arrived without warning, without explanation, without humanity. Their faces were hard, shaped by power and cruelty, and the weapons in their hands gleamed in the lantern light. They shouted orders that made no sense to us, words soaked in hatred and drink. Mothers clutched their children tighter, pressing small heads against their chests, as if love alone could shield them. I remember a little girl near me, no older than 6, rubbing sleep from her eyes, confused by the noise, asking her mother why the men were angry. Her mother had no answer, only tears. The first scream cut through the air like a blade. It was sharp, sudden, and final. Panic exploded in every direction. People tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. The cabins that had sheltered us became traps, their doors kicked in, their walls trembling with violence. Children were pulled from arms that refused to let go. I saw a boy reach for his older brother, his fingers slipping as he was dragged away. I heard names shouted into the darkness, desperate calls that were never answered. I wanted to move, I wanted to fight, I wanted to die if it meant stopping what was happening, but fear locked my body in place, rooted me to the ground like a tree struck by lightning. I watched as innocence was destroyed before my eyes, each moment carving itself into my soul. The men showed no hesitation, no doubt. To them, these children were not lives, not futures, not human beings. They were warnings. They were lessons written in blood. The lantern light danced wildly as shadows leapt across the ground, turning every face into a mask of terror. The smell of smoke mixed with iron and sweat, and the sounds, those sounds, still follow me in my sleep. Crying, pleading, screaming, then silence. One by one, the voices of the children were erased, swallowed by the night as if they had never existed. Each silence was louder than the last, pressing down on my chest until breathing felt impossible. I remember falling to my knees at some point, though I don't remember choosing to. The earth was cold and damp beneath my hands, grounding me in a world that no longer made sense. My mind kept asking the same question over and over. Why? There was no rebellion that night, no escape attempt, no crime committed by those children except being born into chains. Yet punishment came anyway, swift and merciless. A mother near me wailed when her son was taken from her, a sound so raw it felt like it tore the sky open. She fought with a strength born of love, clawing and screaming, until she was struck down and left motionless on the ground. I did not know if she was dead or alive, and I was too afraid to find out. Fear had turned us into ghosts, watching our own destruction from the outside. Time lost its meaning. Minutes felt like hours, hours like lifetimes. My heart pounded so hard I was sure they could hear it, that it would betray me. I pressed myself against the side of a cabin, trying to make my body smaller, trying to disappear. I tasted blood where I had bitten my lip, trying to keep from crying out. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs would not obey. When it finally ended, it did not end with relief, it ended with emptiness. The men laughed, their voices loud and careless, as if they had finished a night of entertainment rather than a massacre. They walked away, lanterns bobbing into the distance, leaving behind broken bodies and shattered souls. The dogs followed, their barking fading until only the night remained. The silence that followed was unbearable. No child cried. No one spoke. The world felt hollow, as if something essential had been torn out of it. I looked around slowly, afraid of what I would see, afraid of what I already knew. Small bodies lay where they had fallen, some still, some twisted in ways no living body should be. The moonlight revealed faces frozen in expressions of fear and confusion, eyes that would never see another sunrise. I wanted to scream then. I wanted the world to hear what had been done, but my voice was gone. All I could do was breathe, shallow and uneven, each breath a reminder that I was still alive when so many were not. Guilt crept into my chest, heavy and poisonous. Why had I been spared? What right did I have to stand when they lay silent? Somewhere inside me, something changed forever. The boy I had been, quiet, hopeful in small secret ways, died that night alongside the children. In his place remained something harder, something forged by pain and memory. I understood with a clarity that hurt that survival was no longer just about living. It was about remembering. It was about carrying the weight of that night so it would not vanish into forgotten darkness. Even now, when I close my eyes, I see the lanterns, hear the screams, feel the cold earth beneath my hands. That night did not pass. It followed me, step by step, breath by breath. And though I escaped with my life, a part of me was buried there, in that place where innocence was slaughtered, and the truth of America revealed itself in the cruelest way possible. I do not remember deciding to survive. Survival simply happened to me, like a cruel accident. When the last lantern light disappeared and the laughter of the men faded into the distance, my body finally remembered how to move. I was lying among the fallen, pressed so close to the earth that my face was smeared with mud and blood that was not mine. The smell was overwhelming, iron, smoke, fear, yet I did not gag or cry out. I stayed still, terrified that even the sound of breathing might bring them back. My heart hammered so violently that it hurt, each beat a painful reminder that I was alive. I waited, counting breaths without knowing why, listening for footsteps that never came. Somewhere nearby, someone moaned softly, a broken sound filled with pain. I wanted to reach out, to help, to whisper comfort, but fear chained me tighter than any iron. That night taught me how quickly love can turn into danger, how kindness could cost you your life. I slowly became aware of the weight on my body. A child's small arm lay across my chest, light as a feather yet heavier than anything I had ever carried. I did not know his name. I never would. His eyes were open, staring at nothing, and in the moonlight they reflected the stars above, as if the sky itself had been trapped inside them. I closed his eyes with trembling fingers, whispering a prayer I barely remembered. My hands shook so badly I thought they might give me away. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. Every rustle of leaves made my muscles tense. Every distant howl of an animal sent terror through my bones. At some point the cold crept into me, seeping through my thin clothes, settling deep in my joints. I realized then that if I stayed where I was until morning, I might not live to see it. The men could return, others might come, or I might simply freeze beneath the weight of grief and fear. I slid the small arm gently from my chest and pushed myself up inch by inch, careful not to disturb the bodies around me. My legs felt weak, as if they no longer belonged to me. When I finally stood, the world spun, and I had to grip the side of a cabin to keep from falling. The wood was rough beneath my fingers, splintered and stained, and it felt like the last solid thing in a world that had shattered. I did not look back again. I could not. If I did, I knew I would collapse, and collapse meant death. I moved toward the edge of the clearing, toward the dark line of trees that had always frightened me as a child. That night, the forest felt less dangerous than the men who ruled our lives. Darkness became my shield, and fear became my guide. The moment I crossed into the trees, the sounds changed. The open silence of the clearing gave way to whispers, leaves rustling, branches creaking, unseen creatures moving just beyond sight. I stumbled over roots and rocks, my bare feet tearing on thorns and sharp stones. Pain flared, but it barely registered. My mind was elsewhere, replaying the night over and over, each memory sharper than the last. I ran until my lungs burned and my chest felt like it might split open. When I could no longer run, I walked. When I could no longer walk, I crawled. I did not know where I was going. Direction had no meaning, only distance mattered. Every step away from that place felt like a betrayal, yet every step closer to it felt like suicide. At some point, exhaustion dragged me to the ground. I collapsed beneath a tangle of bushes, curling into myself like a wounded animal. My body shook uncontrollably, not from cold alone but from shock. from the sudden understanding that nothing would ever be the same. Tears came then, silent and unstoppable, soaking into the dirt beneath my face. I cried for the children, for their mothers, for the life that had been stolen from all of us. I cried because I was alive, and I had myself for it. Sleep came in broken pieces, filled with nightmares. I saw lanterns floating through the trees, heard boots behind me, felt hands grabbing at my shoulders. Each time I jerked awake, my heart raced, convinced I had been found. Dawn eventually crept in, pale and hesitant, filtering through the leaves above me. Birds began to sing, their songs painfully normal, as if the world had not ended just hours before. Morning light revealed my condition. My feet were bleeding, my clothes torn, my body smeared with dirt and dried blood. I looked down at my hands and barely recognized them. They seemed older somehow, as if the night had aged me beyond my years. Hunger gnawed at my stomach, sharp and insistent, but fear kept me from moving right away. Daylight made hiding harder. It exposed everything. I forced myself to listen, to watch, to learn. The forest became my teacher. I learned which sounds meant danger and which meant nothing at all. I learned how to step softly, how to breathe quietly, how to freeze when something moved nearby. Every snapped twig sent a jolt of terror through me, yet slowly, painfully, I began to adapt. As the hours passed, the weight of what had happened settled fully on my chest. The children were gone. Their laughter, their questions, their small hopes, all erased in a single night. I carried their faces with me, each one etched into my memory. I promised them, silently, that I would not forget. Forgetting felt like another kind of death. The guilt returned again and again, relentless. I replayed every moment, wondering if there was something, anything, I could have done differently. Could I have warned them? Could I have distracted the men? Could I have died with them instead of running? These questions had no answers, yet they followed me like shadows, whispering accusations with every step I took. By the second day, thirst became unbearable. My mouth was dry, my tongue swollen, and my thoughts grew sluggish. I followed the sound of running water, crouching low as I approached a small stream. I drank greedily at first, then forced myself to slow down, remembering warnings passed down in whispers about sickness and death. Even survival required caution. As I knelt there, hands cupped around the cool water, I saw my reflection. A stranger stared back at me, eyes wide and haunted, face hollowed by fear. I realized then that the person I had been before that night was truly gone. In his place stood someone shaped by loss, driven by instinct and memory rather than hope. I moved again before dusk, knowing night could hide me but also kill me. Every shadow looked like a man with a weapon. Every distant sound felt like pursuit. Yet no one came. The world went on, indifferent to my terror, indifferent to the lives that had been destroyed. By the time darkness fell again, I understood something terrible and true. I was alone. The community that had raised me, that had suffered together, had been torn apart. Survive. Al meant isolation. It meant carrying pain in silence. It meant learning to live with ghosts. That second night in the forest, I lay awake staring at the stars through gaps in the trees. I wondered if the children saw the same sky from wherever they were, if they felt free at last. I whispered their names, those I knew, those I didn't, into the darkness, letting the forest hear what the world refused to acknowledge. I had escaped with my life, but escape was not freedom. It was a beginning carved out of horror, a path paved with fear and memory. And as I drifted into uneasy sleep, one truth settled deep within me. From that night forward, every breath I took belonged not just to me, but to those who never had the chance to run. The forest did not welcome me, but it tolerated me, and that was enough. Days blurred together until time lost its edges, measured not by sunrise and sunset, but by hunger, fear, and the constant effort to remain unseen. I learned quickly that survival was a discipline, a harsh teacher that punished mistakes without mercy. Every movement had to be deliberate, every sound considered. I no longer walked like a man. I moved like a shadow, borrowing space only briefly before giving it back. My body changed before my mind could catch up. Muscles hardened from constant motion, from climbing, crouching, running when panic seized me without warning. My feet became numb to pain, calloused and torn, yet somehow still carried me forward. Cuts festered and healed. B. Adley. leaving scars that mapped my journey through thorns and stones. At night, when the cold crept into my bones, I wrapped myself in leaves and mud, smelling like the earth itself, hoping predators, human or otherwise, would pass me by. Hunger became a constant companion, a gnawing presence that never fully left. At first, I ate whatever I could find, berries I half remembered from whispered warnings, roots dug from the ground with bare hands, insects swallowed with closed eyes and a clenched jaw. Sometimes my stomach revolted, doubling me over in pain, and I would lie there wondering if this was how I would die, poisoned by ignorance rather than killed by cruelty. Yet each time I survived, learning slowly, painfully, which gifts of the forest were safe and which were traps. But hunger was nothing compared to the weight inside my chest. The forest was quiet in a way that felt unnatural after what I had witnessed. That silence gave my memories too much room to breathe. Faces returned to me uninvited, especially at night. I saw the children as they had been before the screams, laughing, chasing each other through dust, asking questions about a world that had already decided their fate. Those memories hurt more than the images of their deaths, because they reminded me of what had been taken. Sleep offered no refuge. When exhaustion finally dragged me under, dreams twisted into nightmares. Lantern light bled through the trees, boots crunched leaves behind me. I ran, but my legs felt heavy, as if the earth itself were holding me back. I woke gasping, heart racing, hands clutching at nothing. More than once, I woke with a scream trapped in my throat, teeth clenched so tightly my jaw ached. The forest heard my suffering, but it did not answer. As days turned into weeks, loneliness settled in like a second skin. I spoke to no one, yet my mind was loud with voices from the past. I argued with ghosts, pleaded with memories, cursed myself for surviving. Guilt followed me everywhere, whispering that I was a coward, that I had chosen my own life over theirs. Some days, that guilt felt heavier than hunger or fear, and I wondered if it would be easier to stop moving, to let the forest take me and end the struggle. But something stubborn inside me refused to die. Perhaps it was anger, raw and directionless, or perhaps it was the promise I had made in silence, to remember, to carry their story forward. I began to realize that survival itself was an act of defiance. Every breath I took was proof that the night had not succeeded in erasing us completely. That thought did not bring comfort, but it brought purpose, and purpose kept my legs moving when despair tried to pull me down. I learned to read the forest as if it were a living thing. Broken branches meant recent passage, disturbed soil meant animals, or men. The wind carried information if I listened closely, warning me of smoke, of voices, of danger I could not yet see. I learned which birds fell silent when strangers approached, which insects fled before heavy footsteps. The forest taught me to be alert, to distrust calm, to prepare for flight even in moments of stillness. America was supposed to be the land of freedom, or so I had heard whispered late at night, passed from mouth to mouth like a fragile secret. But out here, stripped of illusion, I understood the truth more clearly than ever. Freedom was not given, it was hunted, chased, punished. The soil beneath my feet was soaked in suffering long before my own, layered with the pain of those who had run, hidden, fought, and fallen. I was not the first, and I would not be the last. Occasionally, I saw signs of other lives, abandoned campsites, crude traps, markings on trees that spoke of passing souls. I never followed them. Trust had become a luxury I could not afford. Anyone could be a threat, and hope was dangerous. Yet knowing others had survived, even briefly, reminded me that resistance existed, scattered and fragile, but real. There were moments when I reached the edge of the forest and saw farms or distant roads, reminders of the world I had fled. Smoke curled from chimneys. Horses moved slowly across fields. Ordinary life continued, untouched by the massacre that had reshaped my existence. Rage flared in me then, hot and sudden. How could the world go on as if nothing had happened? How could laughter exist so close to such horror? I stayed hidden, watching from a distance, learning patterns. I saw patrols pass occasionally, armed men scanning the woods, searching for what they called property. Each time, fear surged anew, reminding me that capture would not mean a return to chains. It would mean death. My name, my past, my very existence had become a crime. As weeks turned into months, my thoughts began to change. Pain remained, but it no longer paralyzed me. I began to think not just of surviving the next day, but of what survival might mean beyond that. Could I reach a place where running was no longer necessary? Did such a place exist, or was it another dangerous story meant to keep hope alive? I remembered elders speaking in low voices about routes through the wilderness, about people who helped and people who betrayed. Those stories had once felt distant, unreal. Now they became maps in my mind, incomplete and uncertain, but better than wandering blindly. I weighed every decision carefully, knowing a single mistake could erase everything I had endured. Yet even as my mind sharpened, my heart remained heavy. The forest could not replace what I had lost. There were no children's voices here, no shared laughter, no sense of belonging. Survival was lonely, and loneliness carved deep grooves in my spirit. Some nights I spoke aloud just to hear a human voice, my own sounding strange and unfamiliar in the open air. I marked time by the changing leaves, by the way the air cooled and warmed again. Seasons shifted, indifferent to my suffering. With each change I felt myself hardening, becoming someone shaped by endurance rather than innocence. The softness I once carried, quiet hopes, small dreams, had been burned away. In its place grew caution, resolve, and a quiet fury that never fully slept. I began to understand that my pain was not mine alone. It was part of a larger wound, one that stretched across generations. The children who died were not just victims of one night's cruelty, they were casualties of a system built on dehumanization. That realization did not ease my grief, but it gave it context, turning personal sorrow into something broader, heavier, and harder to ignore. There were moments of beauty, brief and unexpected, sunlight filtering through leaves, the sound of rain washing the earth clean, a deer standing still long enough to meet my gaze before disappearing. These moments reminded me that the world was not entirely cruel, that life persisted even in broken places. I clung to them, small anchors in a sea of despair. Still, the past never loosened its grip. Every choice I made was haunted by the memory of that night. Every risk carried the faces of those who had not survived. I did not know if I was living for myself anymore, or simply carrying the weight of others forward. Perhaps it was both. By the time I left the deepest part of the forest, I was no longer the frightened boy who had fled into the darkness. I was something else, still afraid, still wounded, but forged by experience into someone who understood the cost of survival. The forest had stripped me down to what was essential and rebuilt me with scar tissue and resolve. I carried no weapon but my awareness, no protection but my silence. Yet I carried something else as well, a story that refused to die. And as I moved forward, step by careful step, I knew that whatever lay ahead, freedom or death, I would face it with the full weight of memory behind me, unwilling to let the world forget what it had tried so hard to erase. Years passed, though I could not always tell how many. Time no longer moved in clean lines for me. It folded in on itself, shaped by memory rather than calendars. My body survived the seasons, but my spirit carried every mile I had walked, every night I had hidden, every name I whispered to the dark. I eventually reached places where the forest thinned and the world opened into roads, rivers, and towns that pretended not to see me. I learned when to move and when to vanish, when silence saved lives and when a single word could destroy them. Freedom, when it came in pieces, did not arrive as joy. It arrived as exhaustion. It was the absence of chains, not the presence of peace. Even when no one chased me, I still felt hunted. Even when my stomach was full, hunger lived in my bones. Even when I slept under a roof, I woke reaching for shadows. Trauma does not end when danger ends, it settles in, becoming part of how you breathe, how you listen, how you trust, if you ever do again. I met people along the way who had survived their own nights of horror. We rarely spoke of details. A look, a pause, a shared silence said enough. We understood each other in the way the broken understand the broken. Some had lost parents, some had lost children, some had lost entire communities. We carried our losses quietly, knowing the world was not kind to those who spoke too loudly about its sins. There were moments when I wanted revenge, when anger surged so hot it frightened me. I imagined faces, imagined justice delivered with the same cruelty I had witnessed. But each time those thoughts rose, the children's faces followed. They did not ask me to become what had destroyed them. They asked me to remember, to live, to speak when the time was right. Revenge might have satisfied my rage, but it would have erased my purpose. Instead, I learned to tell the truth carefully. Not everyone wanted to hear it. Some turned away, uncomfortable, defensive, angry that the past refused to stay buried. Others listened with tears in their eyes, shocked that such things had happened in a land that called itself righteous. To those people, I spoke for the children. I spoke for the mothers whose voices were silenced. I spoke for the boy I used to be, the one who believed suffering could remain invisible forever. History is often written by those who held power, by those who survived without scars they were willing to show. But there is another history, one passed quietly from mouth to mouth, from memory to memory. It is written in pain and resilience, in nights survived and names remembered. I became a keeper of that history, not because I chose to, but because it chose me. There were days when the weight felt unbearable. On those days I would sit alone and let myself grieve fully without apology. I cried for the children who never grew old. I cried for the mothers who never recovered. I cried for a country that had allowed such cruelty to exist, and then tried to forget it ever happened. Grief, I learned, is not weakness. It is proof of humanity in a world that tried to erase it. As I aged, my body slowed, but my memories sharpened. Lines formed on my face, but the images in my mind remained painfully clear. I could still see the lantern light, still hear the boots, still feel the cold earth beneath my hands. Some wounds never close, they simply become part of who you are. I stopped wishing for them to disappear, and started using them as reminders of why my voice mattered. I told my story not to shock, but to warn, not to accuse, but to reveal. Evil thrives in silence, and forgetting is one of its greatest allies. If my survival had any meaning, it was this: to refuse silence, to stand against forgetting, to insist that the lives lost mattered, even if the world had treated them as disposable. I do not claim to represent all who suffered. Each story is unique, each pain deeply personal. But I know this: when one voice speaks truthfully, it gives courage to others. I have seen it happen. I have watched people straighten their backs, lift their eyes, and begin to speak after years of fear. That is how change begins, not with grand speeches, but with honest remembrance. If you are hearing this story now, then the children live again for a moment in your awareness. Their names may be unknown, but their humanity is not. Carry them with you. Question the stories you are told. Look closely at the past, even when it is uncomfortable. Especially when it is uncomfortable. I survived so the truth would survive with me. I survived so the silence would break. And if my story has moved you, if it has made you feel even a fraction of the pain and resilience carried by those who came before, then do not let it end here. Thank you for watching. Please like this video, share it so others can hear this story, and subscribe to the channel to support voices that history tried to silence. Your support helps keep these stories alive.